Welcome. Thank you for being here today. I'm Mallory Newell. I am with the RP group and the project director for the Multiple Measures Assessment Project Research Team. And I'm also the director of institutional research and planning at De Anza College in Cupertino. I'm joined here today by Terrence Willett, one of the senior research analysts on the Multiple Measure Assessment Project team, and he is the Dean of Research and Institutional Effectiveness at Cabrillo College. We also wanted to thank Lauren Alano, who's with the RP group, for much of her work on these analyses, but she couldn't be here with us today. And then Alyssa Nguyen from the RP group is also going to be helping us moderate the chat and so forth. On the agenda today, we're going to do a deep dive into the statewide analysis, which is the descriptive statistics. Then we will focus on the technical appendix, which is the regression analysis to support the descriptive statistics. Those are both published, and we'll put those in the chat for you to reference. And if we have time, we will go over the college-specific analyses and the data submission template, and we'll hopefully have time at the end for questions, but we'll stop on the way for questions as well. So the next slide talks about what you should have received. So you should have received, it was sent from the Chancellor's office from Dr. Aisha Lowe to your college president, your vice president of instruction, and your academic senate president, the memo about the required action for AB 1705 for STEM programs. And with it was an attachment of a college-specific report, which is really a replication of the statewide analysis, but using your own college's data. You also would have received the data submission template, which is an Excel file, and a unique link to your college for certifying your validation of equitable placement for AB 1705 STEM programs. We also have available and published now on the RP Group website a statewide report and a technical appendix. So a lot of your questions that you may have are going to be within all of these documents. So if you didn't receive your college-specific report and it's something that you feel you need to be able to look at, I would reach out to your president, your vice president of instruction, or your academic senate president to have them forward that to you. But the statewide report and the technical appendix are available on the website, and we'll go ahead and make sure that those are in the chat. All right, next slide. So AB 1705 has 3 specific standards that must be met, and they specify that colleges must demonstrate the benefit of transfer level math preparatory courses for STEM Calculus 1. And these 3 standards, it's an all statement, right? So you need to satisfy all 3 standards. The first is the highly unlikely standard. So student is highly unlikely to succeed in STEM Calculus 1 without additional transfer level preparation. The second being that enrollment will improve the student's probability of completing the first STEM Calculus course, and that enrollment in the transfer level prep course will improve the student's persistence to and completion of STEM Calculus 2, if STEM Calculus 2 is required. So we'll be referring to these 3 standards or requirements of the law quite a bit, because you'll see on this next slide, we took these 3 standards and we turned them directly into 3 research questions that we explored within an extensive statewide analysis and the local analysis that you received in your college-specific reports. So we really took those 3 standards, turned them into research questions, and explored at the statewide level and at the individual college level where our college is at in meeting these 3 standards. And we're going to walk you through that today. Next slide, please. All right, so what's the methodology for the statewide analysis? So the statewide analysis, it really investigated those 3 questions by examining the progress of community college STEM students based on their first enrollment in math, if it was at a transfer level course within the calculus pathway, which was either college algebra, trigonometry, pre-calculus, or STEM Calculus 1. The time frame is for the statewide analysis is 2012-13 through 2019-20, and it also had a filter to only include students with a degree transfer or undecided goal. We then calculated successful completion rates, which include all STEM students who began in the calculus pathway, regardless of where they started. either in a transfer level prep course or directly in Calculus 1. And so this is a measurement that we call throughput because it's looking at the whole path, the whole sequence, and not just those who eventually enrolled in calculus. So it's looking at where a student starts in the pathway, they successfully complete that first course, if they go on to enroll in another course if it's required, and then ultimately successful completion of STEM Calculus 1 within 2 years, and STEM Calculus 2 within 3 years. So we allowed for a 2-year window for completion of STEM Calculus 1, a 3-year window for STEM Calculus 2, to allow for a full examination of multi-course preparatory sequences because we know that colleges have many different types of multi-course sequences. Next slide, please. All right, so how did we define the STEM Calculus course? And again, all of this information is in the methodology sections. There's an extensive methodology within the statewide report, within the technical appendix, and there's also methodology within your college level report. So to define the STEM Calculus 1, it's the first calculus course required for STEM majors. It excludes business calculus and other forms of applied calculus. So to identify these courses, we used CID, and we identified which courses within CID make up STEM Calculus 1 and those that make up STEM Calculus 2. Next slide, please. All right, so we also disaggregated our STEM students by high school preparation in order to identify a set of students who might be highly unlikely to succeed if they start in Calculus 1, and those who might have higher calculus completion rates if they begin in preparatory coursework, right? So we're trying to identify a group of students who may meet standard 1 and standard 2 of the law. So to do that, we disaggregated the data by the highest high school math course a student completed and the default STEM placement rules that were developed in 2018. And we have those default STEM placement rules here for you. And there's more detail on that also in the technical appendix. Next slide. The source for our high school data came from 2 different places. It came from self-reported CCC applied data, which is from the application. And it also came from high school transcript data from EdResults Partnerships CalPass Plus. And we also ensured that students had records for at least 11th or 12th grade in order to be included in the cohort. Next slide, thank you. All right, so then now in order to identify STEM majors and STEM students, we used STEM majors based off of the Chancellor's Office COMIS data, and we also used the 6-digit top codes. And in order to identify programs that required at least STEM Calculus 1, we based that on the Transfer Model Curriculum, or their TMCs. And so you see here that these top codes that are listed are the ones that we included in the study. And then you'll note at the bottom that biology is included in the analysis, but biology only requires STEM Calculus 1. So it's included in the throughput rates for STEM Calculus 1, but it's excluded in the throughput rates for STEM Calculus 2 since it's not required as part of the major. All right, so let's pause there just for a second and see if there's any specific questions in the chat that we can address around the methodology or what went out to the colleges. Terrence or Alyssa, any questions that you saw around the methodology or what went out to the colleges?
Some people were asking about how they get the report. I think you indicated who should have received that, so you might want to check with your VPI, for example, if you didn't get it yet. There were some other questions about the data set and things like that I think we'll be getting to a little later. Some of them are about some of the changes. You look at the time span of looking at the last decade plus and changes in the use of placement tests and so on. And so that'll be something that we take a look at as well.
Yeah, and then I also see someone was asking about the data file, if they could have access to the data file. And we use Chancellor's Office MIS data files, which you have access to through the MIS referential files. So those data are what we were using because it's the Chancellor's Office data files. So you technically have access to those at your college, but you would need to work through your research office. All right. Terrence, you ready to take it over?
So here we have a graphic taking a look at the heat map of the volume of students in the data set who are starting in the calculus pathway, disaggregated by both their high school GPA as the y-axis and the x-axis showing their highest high school math completed. So you could think of this as a double disaggregation of high school preparation. The warmer or more red colors indicate a higher volume. And so one of the things that we found was there's a lot of self-selection going on in terms of who's choosing to come to the community college, who's choosing to be a STEM major, who's choosing to engage in the STEM math pathways, so that you have a lot of volume of students who have higher levels of high school preparation, both in terms of high school GPA and in terms of levels of math completed at the high school. And so keep that in mind as we progress into the rest of the findings, that's where you have a plurality of students. That said, there are at least a few students in all of these cells, so that there are, even though there's smaller numbers of students, there are students who had either lower levels of high school GPA and or lower levels of high school math preparation in this data set and part of the analysis. Now let's go ahead and go to the next slide and take a look at what we see here. And so we're going to do a series of progressively more complex cuts of the data. So this is a high level cut taking a look at 2-year throughput rates in Calculus 1 of those who had a direct placement, disaggregated by the highest high school math completed within the data set. Now you see we're not showing the ends, those are in the brief and the technical report. But the idea of this first cut was, is there some group by high school preparation level that had, in particular, less than a 50% success rate, a very low success rate relative to another group? And here we see all the groups had an above 50% success rate. And that indicated that we didn't have an indication of a group who was highly unlikely to succeed based upon their high school preparation level. So hold that in mind as we get into the next levels of disaggregation. And you'll note that this time frame, it's not quite a decade, but from 2012 to 2020, you will see, and this is one of the questions in the chat, that for the college level reports, it's the 3 most recent years. And the intent of that was we wanted to focus on current curriculum and curricular structures in the college level reports. And of course, longer timeframes can be done locally. So just to reiterate here, we didn't find a group who is highly unlikely to succeed. But yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which is the same data, but now we're layering on red bars that are showing the throughput rates within 2 years of those who started in a transfer level prep course for calculus. So this would include a college algebra type course, trigonometry, pre-calculus, for example. All of them are rolled up here, and we'll be splitting those out pretty soon. But it's taking a look at students who started in a preparatory class for calculus, tracking them for 2 years, and what percent of them completed the STEM Calculus 1 within that window compared to the direct start. And we see a couple of things. One, we do see in both bars this association between higher levels of high school math and higher levels of throughput, regardless of whether you're a direct placement or not. The other thing that you see is for all the high school prep levels, that direct placement had higher throughput rates than starting in one of the preparatory classes. And so this is an echo of what we were seeing in the AB 705 work, where the remedial, below transfer level remedial classes had an attrition effect going on here. So one of the things I want us to think about is that this analysis, as we proceed, it's really focused on uh, the structure of the sequence. There are content level questions that people go to quite often, and then we'll address those a little later. But just a reminder that this analysis is really focused on the structure and the impact of taking the effect of taking those preparatory courses on this throughput rate. So let's go to the next slide and we'll get into even more disaggregation. So here we take, again, it's still that 2-year throughput in STEM Calculus 1. The blue bars, as you've seen in the last 3 graphs, have remained the same. This is all still descriptive statistics. And we are getting into now a little more detail on the preparatory courses and separating them into the 3 primary flavors of college algebra, trigonometry, and pre-calculus. Going into this, I did have a trigonometry hypothesis. I hypothesized that you would have a stronger performance for the trigonometry start relative to even pre-calculus. My reasoning was that college algebra could be argued to be a lot of the same algebra, again, that people may have seen in elementary and intermediate algebra, whereas trig is more unique content that you get into in the calculus. We're not seeing that. Part of that is you are seeing the trig outperforming the college algebra a bit, but you also have the sequential structure where the trig is commonly part of a 2-course sequence, and we'll see a little later about the number of courses in the sequence and the relationship there. We did do a regression analysis and decision tree analysis. The findings were including other variables that we'll get into a little later, but the bottom line was essentially the same, that your starting place was a primary driver of your throughput rate. And that's a pattern that we saw over and over again. Now let's go ahead and hit the next slide. And here we're taking a slightly different look at the disaggregation. So rather than the content of the courses, this is very specifically focused on the structure. And so we had some colleges that had a 3-course a preparatory path before STEM calculus, that's the light gray. And then some had a 2-course path, commonly college algebra trigonometry. Some had a 1-course path, such as a pre-calculus class that would be like a combo of college algebra and trigonometry, but in one term. And then the blue bar is the starting directly in calculus. Again, same disaggregation by high school math completed, and taking a look at the throughput rather than by the content of the course, by the length of the sequence. And there again, we see, with the exception of those with the highest level of high school preparation with the high school calculus, in general, you see this association where the fewer classes in the sequence, the higher the throughput rate eventually. The high school calculus, you saw more variability there. Part of that has to do with small n's, and again, those counts are in the appendix. And then you'll also note in the bottom, this is for a more restricted time frame as well. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide, where now, instead of STEM Calculus 1, now we're looking at throughput into STEM Calculus 2 and expanding the time frame into 3 years now. Again, trying to be very generous and give plenty of time for these various preparatory sequences to play out. Again, the disaggregation is by the highest high school math completed. And again, you see essentially very similar patterns where the direct starts in Calculus 1 had higher throughput rates than those who had starts in one or more preparatory preparatory classes for calculus. In this particular one, just as a reminder, biology was not included in this because the typical biology major does not require the STEM Calculus 2. So this is a smaller set of STEM majors, like physics, engineering, things like that. In the next slide, we're going to take a look at something that is a little bit different. This is going back to STEM Calculus 1. and again, taking a look at that 2-year throughput. But it's taking a different look at the throughput. This is something that the statewide faculty senate asked us to take a look at. It's called conditional throughput. And so the blue bar is, again, basically the same idea, taking a look at those who directly started in STEM Calculus 1. The red bars in this case, those are the throughput rates for those who successfully completed the transfer level prep courses. What this does is it filters out over 40% of the cohort of those who didn't complete this course. So the preparatory courses. So it's essentially ignoring the attrition effects, and which is not in the law. The law is really about overall throughput, but it was something that people were curious about and wanted to see, and it's more akin to how traditionally we looked at throughput rates in the past, where we would look at the survivors of remedial sequence and how did they do in transfer without accounting for attrition. So this is a similar view here. You do see in general, again, with the exception of those who completed high school calculus, overall, you see the survivors of the preparatory classes had higher throughput rates than those with the direct starts. The differences between them are relatively modest compared to what I might have predicted before doing this analysis, and certainly 15 years ago, if people asked me to predict what the numbers were. And it brings up a lot of questions about the structure of the sequences and how many people get through it versus aren't able to get through these preparatory course sequences, which is, again, a structural argument. It's a little bit different than the content argument or questions that people have when they get into this. And so looks like that with those slides that we've been able to generate more questions, which is good. And I'm going to hand it back to Mallory. If you go ahead and switch to the next slide, and she's going to
before we switch over, let's handle some questions.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
Plenty. Thank you, Terrence, for that. So I saw a lot of repetitive questions, a lot of which are answered within the reports around the methodology and such. So I did put those links in there so that you can take a look at those. There was 3 questions that a lot of people asked quite a bit. So one of the questions was, how could students who do not have pre-calculus or trigonometry in high school get into calculus in college? And this seems to be really something that people can't get their head around, that there's prerequisites and students are getting past the prerequisites, especially within their own college level reports. A lot of people are concerned, how are they in calculus without these prerequisites when you're at college and forces these prerequisites? So that is definitely a question to explore on your campus. You can ask your local researcher to replicate the study. Just look at where students started within within math at your campus to replicate that. But there are a few different ways that students can get in system-wide. There's self-placement or guided self-placement, where students can place themselves into calculus. There's also different levels of enforcement of prerequisites at different schools. So there may be some schools that highly enforce their prerequisites and some who more have it as an advisory and don't enforce that prerequisite. Some colleges also only use high school GPA for placement and not high school coursework. And so they may be allowing a student in with a high GPA that may not have completed, or a GPA above a 2.6 that may not have completed the prerequisites in high school. So there are different ways. And what we're seeing is that it's not concentrated at 1 or 2 colleges. It's spread across all of the colleges across the state. So when you start adding up these, little 10 here, 10 there, 10 there, and when you get across 116 colleges, you have that sample size. So a little bit to that question. There's also another question that has come up a couple of times in the Q&A about how many times does it take a student to complete Calculus 1? And this is also in the report. So we looked across all levels of high school math preparation for direct enrollees into STEM Calculus 1 who completed the calculus course in 2 years, at least 69% passed with a C or better on their first attempt of STEM Calculus 1. So, and there's detail in the technical appendix in table C4 if you wanted to look at that in more detail. So 69% of the students completed STEM Calculus 1 on their first attempt. And then also going to the technical appendix, a lot of people asked for the numbers, the rates that go along with each of these percentages, and those are also in the report and the technical appendix. There was one more about the sample sizes that's come up a couple of times. So we examined a cohort of 37,000 STEM majors that had their first math enrollment in the community college system within the time frame. And of these, 31%, around 11,600 started directly in STEM Calculus 1. So 31%, around 11,500 started directly in STEM Calculus 1. The rest of them, the 69%, which is about 25,000, started in one of the transfer level preparatory courses. And then this is the question that people are really focused on. So of the students who started directly in STEM Calculus 1, over 1,600 of them had not taken pre-calculus or trigonometry in high school. So getting a little bit at those sample sizes that are also in those reports. All right. And then just one more question that's going to go to, it's kind of a preview of the regression analysis that Terrence is going to get into. So Terrence, this is a question for you. Did the RP group take into consideration the duration of time between the last math course taken in high school and first math class taken in the community college?
The short answer is yes. There's some caveats to it. For example, because of the necessity of needing for this analysis, there was a lot of interest in disaggregating by high school preparation level. And in these slide decks, to keep it from being 1,000 slides, we're only showing highest high school math completed in the report. We're also using the decision tree rules from 2016 that are a combo of high school GPA and level of math completed. And so that the time gap is something that for this particular data set, there wasn't as much variance as there has been in prior analyses that we've been able to do, where we've had some longer time gaps to be able to look at the variability between those, say, direct matriculants, as we call them, straight from high school to college versus 1 year waiting versus 5 versus 10 years. In general, we've seen that there's a little bit of an effect of overall success rates declining a little bit with time out, depending on how you cut the data set and which subset you're looking at. We've even seen some U-shaped distributions where older students, you're getting this impact of older students having different motivations and resources and having slightly higher success rates. So there's not as big of an effect overall as one may think with the delay between high school and college math. There's a lot of other factors that appear to be much stronger. My hypothesis as to why that is has to do with from cognitive psychology and the forgetting curve that you tend to forget content fairly exponentially. So even 2 weeks after you take a final, you may not do as well on the same final again, but you have created neural pathways. Once you've learned material, it's easier to re-engage with it. So it's different. There is some difference between having taken algebra 10 years ago versus never having taken algebra. And so that time delay is something that we did take a look at and overall, and we've been looking at that throughout the AB 705 work as well. It's just, it hasn't played out to be an extremely strong factor relative to structural differences and other other factors.
The short answer is yes, we've controlled for it in the regression.
Yeah, I guess you didn't ask for the longer answer. That's the medium answer. There's an even longer answer too.
Thank you. All right, so we can go ahead and go forward, and then we'll get back to some other questions that are coming in the chat. All right, thank you. So now this next slide is what we're showing is the starting level by race and ethnicity. And what we're seeing here is that the red at the bottom is students who started in transfer level prep courses. The blue at the top are those that started in STEM Calculus 1. And then it's disaggregated by race and ethnicity. And what we're seeing here is that 75% of African American and 75% of Hispanic students are starting in transfer level prep courses, compared to 58% of Asian and 66% of white students. And while we recognize that there are systems in place, particularly in high school and within our own systems that we perpetuate those patterns, that Black and Hispanic students do exhibit lower high school GPAs and lower levels of high school math preparation than white and Asian students. So we recognize that there are those differing patterns. However, the patterns that we see here with our African American and Hispanic students starting at higher rates in transfer level prep, they're not solely due to a lack of preparation. This overrepresentation in preparatory course work is also present for Black and Hispanic STEM students who completed advanced high school math. So for example, Black and Hispanic students who successfully completed pre-calculus or calculus in high school were more likely to begin in a transfer level prep course below calculus compared to their Asian and white counterparts. So therefore, given the state's demographics and the diversity of our state, we're continuing to lose students of color in our STEM calculus pathways, which will have lasting effect on our STEM pathways and our STEM opportunity for careers within the community college system and within California in general. So this also speaks to the STEM pathway, and how we're losing students through the pathway as a result of longer transfer level sequences, okay? So as a result of attrition, and that there are multiple courses within a sequence. So what we see here are STEM majors, the STEM majors that we included in the slides, and it's the percent of students who started in a transfer level path course in the pathway to Calculus 1 who did not complete STEM Calculus 1 in 2 years. So we are losing 2/3 of our STEM majors who start in one of these transfer level prep courses prior to STEM Calculus 1. So if we look at the bars, you can see that 73% of biology majors, 64% of engineering majors, 64% of computer science majors, and 64% of math majors did not complete the first STEM calculus course within 2 years of starting in a transfer level preparatory course in the calculus pathway. So overall, for STEM students who begin math in a calculus preparatory course, the statewide attrition rate is 68%. So we're losing 68% of our students due to attrition. And this is due to students who are choosing not to persist even after they have an initial success. So this isn't just our least prepared students who aren't cut out for STEM, right? These are our students who had an initial success in these transfer level prep courses, but are choosing not to persist through a sequence. So for example, over half of students earning an A or a B in college algebra did not enroll in STEM Calculus 1 within 2 years. And nearly 1/3 of students earning an A or a B in trigonometry did not go on to enroll in STEM Calculus 1 within 2 years. So as a result, we are not just losing our least prepared students in our STEM pathways, we're also losing our most prepared students who had a successful completion of one of those transfer level preparatory courses. All right, now we can move on to the next slide. Now, what this slide is showing is another slide where we've disaggregated by race and ethnicity, and this is going back to the 2-year throughput for STEM Calculus 1 that Terrence shared, but now it's just disaggregating it by ethnicity and their starting level. So you can see that the red bars are those that start in the transfer level prep, the blue bars are those that start directly in STEM Calculus 1. And what we see here is that there's no evidence that these transfer level preparatory courses prior to STEM Calculus 1 are associated with higher Calculus 1 throughput when disaggregated by race and ethnicity. And then we also confirm this within our multivariate regression analysis that Terrence is going to walk us through in a moment, that we found that starting in a preparatory college course had the strongest negative effect on STEM Calculus 1 completion among all of the factors that we examined. And the negative association of starting in a preparatory course was stronger than a student's high school GPA, their highest math preparation, their race or ethnicity, their age, or their EOPS status. So in summary of this slide, what we found is that preparatory college coursework prior to calculus is not an effective equity strategy when we disaggregate it and we look at it by ethnicity for improving calculus completion rates, even for students with weaker high school math preparation or lower high school GPA, which we thought initially would benefit the most from these transfer level preparatory courses.
If you could go back one slide, there was one of the questions related to the ethnicity categories. And so these are really high level rolled up categories, especially the Asian category. 40% of the people on the planet are Asian, and there are disaggregations that are important to do, especially if you have a substantial Asian population in your region. For example, Southeast Asian students are likely to have a different experience than those from more majoritized Asian populations, if you will. And so thank you, Vincent, for pointing that out. And so that's also touching on what we're leading into with the regression, that so we've done a statewide analysis. We've worked with statewide Senate and did some faculty focus groups to help shape the analysis. There's always caveats with the data, limitations with what we're able to get at. And this is really the beginning of a next phase where we're hoping all the local research offices dig into this with additional data that they have. And so part of the point of this webinar too is to get juices flowing. And then also in the regression that we're about to get into, we have the regression and decision tree analysis were done in R. We're sharing the R code, and the RP group in general provides professional development support and collegial support to help people engage with these analyses, and then a venue for sharing findings, things that people are able to get into with additional data that are not available in MIS. And so a couple of frequently asked questions: what about students who drop before census? Those aren't in MIS, but they are available locally. Or questions about people who switch majors into or out of STEM. And so here we're really focused on those who had a STEM major. This particular analysis didn't look at major switching into and out of STEM. There have been other analyses that I've worked on in the past that look at differential STEM persistence by ethnicity and gender, to look at equity, about people feeling, students feeling engaged in a sense of belonging in STEM majors. And so that's, again, either it's both follow-up research for the MAP team, but also a work to be done at the local level as well. So those are, and then another common question that I was seeing in the chat was, I suppose the elephant in the room, or it's not really an elephant in the room, but it's, the COVID years, right? So we had COVID. That's part of the virtue of this, the time frame of this data set is it includes not only pre-COVID, it's also pre-AB 705, it's pre-multiple measures, pre-acceleration work. And so we did do some time series analysis, taking a look at the differential throughput rates between direct placement versus preparatory start over time. And the gaps were actually pretty persistent. And so there is some temptation to look at the COVID years, and yeah, things were different, and grading is very different. A lot of concerns about the integrity of assessments. I personally think it's a mistake to say, well, we should just ignore all those years and throw them away. And maybe 20 years from now, but right now, they are the data that we have, and students actually had experiences and got through. Students who persisted through the COVID years, transferred, got a degree, got a job. And so those are real successes that we see. Not that we shouldn't look at those differences. We tend to call those cohort effects when you have something happening over time. And so we did also in the regression, as we'll see, do our best to account for cohort effects things that happened over time. And so that's something to keep in mind locally. And I don't know, Mallory, while I was chatting, if you noted any other
Yeah, I'll just
questions
answer
that
one
you.
more before we move on. There's a question in the chat that the language of AB 1705 and 705 states that to increase probability of success within 1 year. Why does your study look at 2 years for Calculus 1? And that's a really great question. So we do understand that the law speaks to the 1 year time frame. We wanted to give colleges more time to allow students to get through multi-course sequences, because we know that colleges have 2 or 3 course pathways prior to STEM Calculus 1. So we wanted to give as a liberal time frame and allow students 2 years to get through that sequence. So we're really trying to expand that pathway to see if there was a probability or likelihood that more students could complete within that time frame. We do have a 1 year throughput within the report that you can see in the appendix. It follows the same pattern, but of course the overall completion rates are a little bit lower. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the regression analysis.
Oh, goody. Our favorite part. So let's take, our best attempt, we can't do experiments. If we're allowed to, we would take students and randomly put them in different courses and be able to control for all those differences in background variation. A lot of the questions have been about that. Like, how do you get at equivalency of these of students with these different with these direct starts versus preparatory starts. Historically, some of the key factors that have been predictors of success have been things such as where did you start in the sequence, highest high school math, and some other factors. So the primary outcome variable that we looked at was the Calculus 1 2-year throughput. One of the primary controls or factors that were predictor variables was your first community college math course. Categorical variable, were you a direct placement, and did you start in one of the 3 preparatory courses and disaggregated by the 3 different courses? Your highest high school math course. Just a side note that integrated math and the traditional math were equated with each other. For example, integrated math 3 and algebra 2 both meet the UC A through G entrance requirements, and so they're equated. Again, the content is different, and so people are encouraged to do local level disaggregation in addition to having college math faculty engage with high school math faculty to talk about content, talk about structure, talk about supports like co-requisites, tutoring, different ways to structure the curriculum. But for this, the integrated and traditional sequences were equated in that way. High school GPA, cumulative unweighted high school GPA, so the AP part wasn't considered in this case. We had a dummy variable for before and after AB 705/COVID. They were pretty close to each other, somewhat of a AB 705/COVID control variable, if you will. We did have a variable for the years between last high school math and first community college math, not entrance into the college, but the actual enrollment specifically in the course. So if your last high school math was as a junior, and if you waited a couple of years before your first community college math, it was that time difference, not entrance into the college itself. A race ethnicity variable, a gender variable, an age variable, age of the student, an EOPS indicator, whether or not they're a participant in EOPS ever. And then a couple of institutional level variables, both at the high school and college level, the percent of students at that entity who were underrepresented, which is a bit of a proxy for social capital resources available to the institution, especially at the high school side, given the history of redlining in this country and the state, and how the local taxes are big drivers of the resources available to a high school. There's probably other institutional variables we could have brought in, but wanted to have at least some proxies for the exogenous variables. And again, locally, you should feel free to add more variables and more information that you might have. Like, for example, in my district, we had a catastrophic fire in August of 2020, floods just last year. So you might have some other dummy variables that might influence that might create a cohort effect, for example. So let's take a look at the next slide. And so here, this is a dot plot with error bars, taking a look at using the regression analysis of the predicted probability of your 2-year calculus 1 throughput. And here it's looking at it by your first community college math course is on the x-axis. The y-axis is your throughput rate. And then the double disaggregation with the different colors, and you can see on the legend on the side being the highest high school math, noting that this is the regression. So we're controlling for things like pre-post AB 705, high school GPA, and the other variables mentioned. Overall, you still see basically a very similar pattern where there's a general trend from left to right of higher throughput rates when you're looking at these higher levels of preparatory classes. And then within each level of preparatory class, you get a little more messiness. I think the pattern is the clearest with trigonometry, where you see a very nice staircase pattern with the higher level high school math being associated with higher level throughput within that trigonometry level, noting that some of the error bars overlap with each other. But the dots themselves create a bit of a trend. But again, with the error bars overlapping, there's a little bit of messiness. That's partly because of the influence of the other factors that were included, creating some of that indeterminacy there. But you do see in general that those at the calculus in high school, with the exception of college algebra, those of calculus in high school had the highest throughput rates, again, reinforcing that connection between what you did in high school and what you're going to do in college. And that if there are differences or inequities at the high school level in terms of what's offered and the availability of those types of courses, that can then roll into what's happening at the college. And again, reinforcing the virtue of that collaboration between institutions to see what can be done to boost the capacity of offerings at the high school level as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. So here, this is not the entire odds ratio. There were a variety of different models of different complexities that were tested, from simple, very parsimonious models to very complex models with interaction effects. So this is pulling from the most complex model and just showing a subset of the odds ratios. And these are standardized coefficients. The full table is in the report. It's showing two of the strongest predictors of the throughput in STEM Calculus 1, controlling for other variables, was the starting place. And so if you look at the first few variables, the STEM Calculus 1 is the reference category, and the other 3 classes are being compared to that direct start. An odds ratio of 1 would indicate that the variable had no effect, that starting at below calculus would be the same as the direct start. If the preparatory classes had an odds ratio greater than 1, that would indicate that starting in those preparatory classes increased the odds of having a successful throughput experience. And then in this case, we're seeing all the odds ratios are less than 1, indicating that starting in one of these preparatory courses is associated with lower levels of probability of completing the STEM Calculus 1, while controlling for all these other variables, such as highest high school math in high school and high school GPA and so on. When you look at the values of all these odds ratios, the odds ratios for the preparation start level were the strongest predictors. High school GPA was the next strongest, and that had a flipped association. That was a positive association, where the higher high school GPA was more associated with higher throughput rates. And so this is to give you a sense of what the strongest predictors were when taking into account these other variables. Now, there are lots of other variables. This is social science. You think about what are all the other variables that influence a student's success. social capital, transportation, childcare. There are other factors that are highly influential that are not within the data set. And so we included what we had, and the structural component really came out strong in this particular case. And again, locally, there may be access to more information. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And so this is a confirmatory decision tree model. So this is to test whether or not the use of a logistic regression was driving the results. There was some artifact of the model being used. And so it's good practice to use different models with different assumptions and see, is there stability in the findings? And so in this case, this is a machine learning technique. It's not statistical. It's based on information theory and computer science theory. And you'll see that in the very top green node is what it's called. You'll see two numbers. The top number is the overall throughput rate, and the bottom number is what percent of students are within that node. So it starts off with an amalgam of all the students with a 0.47 or 47% throughput rate, and that contains 100% of the students. Then the algorithm detects, well, what variable will split the data into two groups that have the most homogeneity or similarity within each group. In this case, it was whether or not you started off directly in STEM Calculus 1. So you can think of this as like an answer tree, like, okay, did you start in STEM Calculus 1? If yes, then you go to the right and you see another node. And those students had a 0.78 or 78% throughput rate, and that consisted of 31% of the students. Then the next question that came up along that branch is, well, was your high school GPA greater than or equal to 3.2? If yes, you go to the far right and you see the highest throughput rate of 0.86, which consists of 18% of the students. So this association that is similar to what we're seeing in the regression, that the direct start in calculus and a higher high school GPA rate resulted in a homogeneous group with the highest throughput rates. If you go to the other side, those who started in a preparatory course, then you see that that contains 69% of the sample with a 32% success rate. And then the next question it's asking, is your GPA greater than or equal to 3.1? If the answer is no, if you're below a B average, then that's where you have the lowest throughput rate of 24%, containing 40% of the students. Now, when I say algorithm chose, those two branches, you see that high school GPA was chosen in both of those splits. The algorithm is flexible, and if some other variable had greater predictive variance, that would have shown up in that particular split. For example, if it had been the level of high school math passed, or student gender or ethnicity, and so on. So the splits that occur are telling us what are the two most important variables, the variables that drive the most variance, have the most explanatory value in this model. And similar to the regression, it's whether or not you started directly in STEM calculus, and do you have above a B average high school GPA. So this is generally confirming the findings, and then you'll see a link in the report to both the logistic regression code and the decision tree code. And let's take a look at the, and so in the next slide then, actually it's a good point to pause again, because we'll be getting into the college specific reports. But Mallory, you've probably been looking at the questions. Are there more common questions we can address?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different questions. So one of the questions is around summer starts were excluded. It was a question that came in the Q&A. So the summer, why were summer terms excluded? So summer terms were excluded if a student started the pathway in the summer, because when we were looking at the data, we were finding that a lot of high school students were taking it in the summer. So to reduce the noise of the high school, the dual enrollment students, we did not have the students starting in a cohort in the summer, but summer is included in the completion. So if a summer is part of their 2-year completion, then the summer term is part of that completion timeframe. there's a question about if a student failed calculus on their first attempt, went back and took pre-calculus or another lower math, and then passed calculus, is it still counted as a successful throughput among students who start in calculus? And yes, it is. So they can make that movement within 2 years. If they're within 2 years and they successfully complete their part of the throughput. And then there is also a just kind of a question around the time frame for submitting your certification form. So someone asked that July 1st, 2024 is a very short time frame for making sense of all these data, parsing through it, and they're asking for extension. So at this time, there is no extension. Remember, by July 1st, 2024, you're just submitting your certification form saying what your plans are. And then no changes technically have to be made to your pre-calculus or your pre-transfer level sequences, your calculus sequences, though you should be making all of those plans now until July 1st, 2025. Okay, so the timing around those. So those were a couple that I had noted. I see John and Eric are answering some questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's another one that comes back up a lot, and I'm seeing people are asking questions also based on reading the report while we're talking, which is great. Thank you. One of them, and I think you already addressed it, Mallory, but I want to readdress it. There's the one group of the where at the high school level they had only geometry or lower, and that one again it's almost a distraction. It comes up a lot. In the limitation sections, we talk about a couple of possibilities about, well, what's going on there? There was a lot of different ways that students could go from high school geometry into calculus. And one of them is they could have done extra preparation that is not in our data set. There's a scope limit in the data set. Another aspect that was alluded to was, we're talking about coding. And there are coding errors in lots of courses on the high school and the MIS side. I will say that we were a little, we didn't really talk about this a lot, but in order to do this study, we had to code all of the high school and the college courses at the transfer level. Those of you who are familiar with the MIS coding know that there's the CB21 that codes the number of levels below transfer, but once you get to transfer level, you get a CB of Y, a CB21 of Y, and it doesn't differentiate. So there's a team of us, including math faculty, and then I have my math background, other than having taken a lot of math, I was a math tutor for a very long time, many years at Cabrillo College, and have a good familiarity with the content there, in addition to having worked at CalPAS and wrestled with these intersegmental data sets. And so the coding, it's been really 20 years of coding and maintaining the coding and taking a look at things. And in the past, I have seen where, for example, where an analytic geometry in high school had gotten what they called in the day a CBEDS code, and now is a CalPADS state code of regular geometry. So but by working with local high schools and providing the information, we were able to correct and account for a lot of that. So I don't want to say that there isn't any case where there hasn't been a persistent miscoding at a particular school where their analytic geometry is coded as geometry. But I'm highly confident that that is going to be a rare circumstance. It's not going to be a never circumstance. And as we proceed in with new data systems like the Cradle to Career, they're building off a lot of this coding work and ensuring that accuracy. And so that's another virtue of, here we've got this state level work. There was, a lot of meticulous effort by a team of people to do our best in terms of the coding. But like with the AB 705, the next step was a whole, over 100 research offices also taking a look at this locally, taking a look at the coding, interrogating the data, bringing in other variables to verify what's going on. And so I know that these findings are challenging. They are not what I predicted they would be, especially when I started this work 20 years ago, looking at this linkage between high school and college data. I have many times been surprised and challenged that um, the structure of additional preparatory courses didn't result in higher throughput rates the way that we expected. And I know that in particular, this has been, since, both multiple measures 705 and now 1705, challenging in particular for math faculty. There's a lot of focus on the content. And well, how is it that if you didn't have a lot of trigonometry, how are you going to do in the trig portion of calculus, for example? And so I'm very empathetic to that and want to give my math colleagues a lot of appreciation because y'all have engaged with multiple measures, acceleration, 705, and a lot of work. And so now what we're asking folks to do is, take a look at this work, digest it, ask questions about it. And then part of the purpose of the college level analyses is to, do some verification, do that deeper dive, and also be creative, thinking about content and structure. And so, Mallory, let me hand it back to you to touch a bit more on those college level analyses.
Yeah, and I think this really goes to, I think a lot of people are in the chat, airing their frustrations about the data. And yeah, we get that. And you have this opportunity. If you do not agree with your college level analysis, you can submit a local analysis and just let us know what courses you're including and the time frame and so forth. And we will take a look at that and see if it meets the 3 standards of the law or the opportunity for interim approval. So I will note that there are 12 colleges in the state that were awarded through their college level analysis interim approval because their STEM calculus their pre-calculus sequence, the last course in their sequence, did meet a standard that the chancellor's office included to be more liberal, which is it's actually not a standard in the law, but it was added to allow colleges to meet a threshold of if their transfer level placement, transfer level prerequisite is above 50%, even if it's not above the student's completion of direct access, that they're allowed to keep that course on an interim period for 2 years. So there are 12 colleges that were able to meet that threshold. So you are able to submit based on your local, the data submission template. Then I would also remind folks that there is option D, right? And option D is the opportunity to have a new innovative course, right? So you don't need to get rid of your transfer level prerequisites. This is giving you an opportunity to have the innovative sequence at the transfer level below Calculus 1, level below, to try something new, a 4-unit course with up to a 2-unit co-requisite course for semester schools. And you can try that course for 2 years on a innovative period, right? So you're given the opportunity to have that course at below 1 level below calculus for 2 years to try that out. So remember, there's these different gradations within the certification form. So the purpose of these college level analyses is to help you determine what option you're going to choose on your certification form. So any college can submit a data submission template, and then any college that chooses to follow their local reports doesn't need to submit data, right? And so those are options B2 and C2. What we did find with the college level research when we're looking at individual colleges is that even though colleges are unique, they have different sequences, they have different students, they have different populations in which they serve. The results from the college level analyses were very consistent with the statewide results, in that no college met all 3 standards of the law, and that transfer level preparatory courses did not meet the AB 1705 standards. So really, the combination of looking college by college and statewide, we recognize that the high rates of attrition in these pathways to calculus are serving as a bottleneck for STEM programs. And these efforts to improve STEM participation and STEM equity hinge on us addressing this issue. And if you choose option A, in the certification form, that option that shows the most promise is calculus with a co-requisite, right? So direct access to calculus with a co-requisite. And we have many colleges that are now implementing calculus with a co-requisite this year, and they're getting back very positive results with that. So there's many options to select from within the certification form. So next slide, please. Within the college level analyses, we defined the lowest STEM placement group, and we did this in order to identify a set of students who might be highly unlikely to succeed in STEM Calculus 1 without the transfer level prep and might benefit from the transfer level prep. So in order to meet standards 1 and 2, right? And this would be the group that would assume would be least likely to meet these standards, the lowest STEM placement group. We define that lowest STEM placement group as less than or equal to 2.6 or had not previously earned a C or better in high school trigonometry, pre-calculus, or calculus. You will see that the time frame is a more recent time frame than the statewide analysis. And we also included a table of the local courses included in the analysis. There have been some questions in the chat around the courses that were included. You can submit any questions around that to the ab705@ccco.edu website or email address, and we'll try to address your questions around the specific courses that were included. But also, if you felt that a course was incorrectly included, you can always submit the appropriate course through the data submission template. Next slide, please. So you'll see in the college level analyses that it's disaggregated by two different student groups, the all students, which are not just all students, they had to have STEM intent. And so it's students who showed STEM intent by starting in a transfer level course in the college's path to STEM Calculus 1. And then STEM majors are a subset of all students who have a STEM major based on the top code that we talked about earlier. All right, so every college will have a summary of their analysis. And so this is just a sample of what a college may receive, what it looks like. And each of the bullets correspond with the standard of the law. So for example, the first bullet corresponds with the first standard, the highly unlikely. And it's gonna let you know where your college is at in relation to the highly unlikely threshold. The second bullet talks about the second standard of the law, where your college is in regards to the difference between the transfer level prep and the direct calculus start over 2 years. And then the third bullet is that additional option that was added to allow for more flexibility in granting the interim approval, which is that more than 50% of the lowest STEM placement students who start in a particular class completed STEM Calculus 1 and 2 years. So there are a dozen colleges that were awarded the opportunity to keep enrolling students into that course during the probationary period. Then all colleges received the fourth bullet, which is reiterating the law that students need to continue on their path from high school to college. So if a student successfully completed pre-calculus or calculus in high school, they should have direct access to calculus, and that's been part of the law. And then the last bullet is just a summary of your results to help you inform you of what selection you would like to make in the certification form. Next slide, please. So now I'll just show you a couple of the tables in the college level report. So first we provided the head count by year that's included for the STEM majors and then the all students. And again, it's the same methodology we use for the statewide analysis, that it's where if a student started in a transfer level course on a STEM calculus pathway. And then we break it down by their first community college math course. So it will list the community college math course that your college offers. And that could be college algebra, trigonometry, pre-calculus 1, pre-calculus 2. So if a student started in pre-calculus 2 rather than pre-calculus, that number is displayed for STEM majors and all students. And then the number that started directly in STEM calculus 1. And then table 3 are now showing you the throughput rates for the cohorts that we just discussed. And this is the 2-year STEM Calculus 1 throughput by their first community college math course. for STEM majors and all students. And then it's by your lowest STEM placement group and all higher placement groups. So now you can see the differences by their first starting level and by their high school preparation. And what you'll see here is one thing that you're going to want to look for is if any of the courses below STEM Calculus 1 within the lowest STEM placement group. So for example, if I'm looking at Pre-Calculus 2 here, you'll see there are 69 students in the STEM majors and their completion rate is 58%. Their throughput rate is 58%. So this, in this instance, the college would be awarded interim approval because that rate is above 50%. And then you're also going to want to be looking at the STEM Calculus 1. Is that rate below the rate of any of the other courses listed? And that would have to do with the standard 2. Okay. The next slide is just showing you that it also includes a graph so that people that are more visually inclined can see the rates and it's nice colors. So you can see the variability in the outcomes. And again, the patterns here are very similar to the statewide analysis. So we'll go ahead and stop here before we go on to the data submission template and just see if there's any questions specific to the college-specific reports that you see in the chat. Anything come in?
Let's see. There's a lot of questions about defining innovative course.
Yeah, and there's a question about why these numbers are so small statewide. So what I was just showing you is just a sample of like 4 colleges. It's not the statewide results. I was just showing you what a sample data a college-specific data report would look like. So the innovative course, let me just pull up the certification form so that I have it correct. So in the memo clearly defines what each of the options are. And option D is an innovative course. So it says colleges choosing this option are planning to enact the STEM Calculus pathway placement rules with the innovative preparatory course option for the lowest STEM placement students. An innovative preparatory course is no more than 4 units with no more than 2 units of co-requisite support. So students in the lowest placement group, the course can be 4 units with 2 units of concurrent support. It can be offered during the 2-year innovation period from fall 25 through spring 2027. And if you do certify for the innovative course, that course will need to undergo additional validation by July 2027 to ensure that it's meeting the standards of the law. But it is an opportunity to allow for a 2-year window to try something new. So it's a newly developed course that can be offered for the lowest placement group of students. And so I would refer back to the memo and your certification form for more details on the innovative option.
In a follow-up with the innovative course, is there, and I think the answer is no, but is there a requirement that this innovative course articulate to a university with the add-on concern that, the time frame is insufficient for articulation? I don't think articulation is required that I recall. But it does touch on a lot of questions and concerns about articulation in general and differences between the systems in terms of, like, for example, the 1705 only applies to community colleges. And so there's a little bit of policy drift between CSUs and UCs on this. Again, I personally encourage people to collaborate across systems. And I know at the system level, there's discussions about these implications and, in the spirit of Cal Getsy of trying to get everyone on the same page, these discussions, are indeed happening.
Yeah, and then there's another question around the time frame, if someone could include a different time frame. So yes, when we get into the data submission template, you can in fact include a different time frame as long as it's not sooner than fall 2019.
And there's also a lot of questions. I see Eric, answering one of them about multi-campus districts. Like, for example, in our analysis, we were, you could have started in one college and finished in another. So the throughput rates are therefore higher than you would have if you only looked within a single college or single district. And so there's questions about working if you're in a multi-college district, how should one proceed with the validation in terms of, okay, you start at, say, De Anza and finish it at Foothill. And that distinction between is the compliance, if you will, at the district level or the college level.
All right, next slide. So now we'll go into the data submission templates. All right, thank you so much. So again, not all colleges need to submit a data submission template. Again, we hope that not many colleges are submitting a data submission template. That was really the purpose of the college level reports, is to do most of the work for you. So the colleges that choose to submit local data are doing so because they would like to certify with options B1 and C1, okay? So you will follow the directions to create a cohort of the lowest STEM placement students. Please do read the directions. The directions have a lot of information and probably answer a lot of your questions on who is to be in or not in the cohort. Remember, you're selecting students whose first math course was in the transfer level preparatory sequence, including STEM Calculus 1. You'll need to determine what top codes you're using. If you're not using top codes for the STEM majors, then you would include all students, but you would need to make sure that they started in a STEM preparatory course or in STEM Calculus 1. And then you can determine your own time frame and combine the cohorts into one, but ensure that the cohorts have enough time to complete, right? So 2 years STEM Calculus 1, 3 years for STEM Calculus 2, and please do not include data prior to fall 2019. If you are submitting data for more than one course, submit each course on a separate tab. And again, there's directions and instructions and examples around what that means about the different, how you might have multi-course sequences and why you would want to submit multiple courses. The data will be submitted only in the highlighted yellow areas. And then if are you reporting for a multi-college district, please do not combine the data. Please only report it for one college at a time. Okay, so this is an example of what the tables look like. You'll be asked to include information around the STEM codes that you're including, the cohort timeframe, and then course details such as the course control number and so forth. Next slide. So now what is the data that you're including in table 1? So table 1 is Calculus 1 throughput in 2 years. So first you're going to identify your lowest placement group. So we're only submitting the lowest placement group in the data submission template. You're first going to identify your starting cohort based on where they start, either in a transfer level prep course or STEM Calculus 1, and you're going to put them in that row. Then you are going to identify of that cohort how many students successfully completed STEM Calculus 1 within 2 years, and you'll put that in the next row. And then the throughput rate will be calculated for you. Okay. On the next slide, this is now table 2, which is STEM Calculus 2, given 3 years to complete. Again, you'll do the same thing, identify the top code, and why you identify the top code again, even though it's a similar cohort, is because biology majors do not require STEM Calculus 2, so you would remove them from this analysis and not track them through STEM Calculus 2, okay? And then again, ensure that the cohort has enough time based on their starting time frame that they can complete within 3 years. Next slide, please. So you're going to want to provide the data. I think I went ahead a little bit. So the last slide was basically STEM Calculus 1. All right. So now this is an example, when you would submit the data. So just because you are completing the data submission template doesn't mean that you need to actually submit the data submission template to the chancellor's office. So you would want to make sure that when you're submitting, you're meeting the requirements of the option in which you're submitting for. So for example, in the first table that's displayed there, this is an example of a college meeting the interim approval, option C. So you can see here that the students starting in transfer level prep have a completion rate, a throughput rate of 53%, which is above the rate of, or is above 50%, which allows them to have interim approval. So if that rate is not above 50% and you're selecting option C to certify, you would not need to submit this data submission template because you're not meeting the requirements of option C. Now, the next example is a college that would be certifying for full approval, where they're meeting all three standards of the law. This is a hypothetical example because when we looked at the college level reports, we did not find a college that met all three standards of the law. But I'll still walk you through this just in case you want to try to submit data to validate for full approval at your college. So first you would need to look and see the highly unlikely, which is the 13.2%. So the students who start in STEM Calculus 1 have a throughput rate less than 15%, so you're meeting standard 1. The second is you're going to go a little bit to the left with the 53.4%. Again, that rate is above the rate, the transfer level prep start is above the rate of students who start directly in Calculus 1. And so that meets standard 2. And then you're going to go to the table 2 and look at the STEM Calculus 2 completers. And if the STEM Calculus 2 completion rate for students who start in transfer level prep is higher than those who start directly in STEM Calculus 1, you're meeting the third standard of the law. So therefore, you could submit for full approval. So those are examples. So again, just to recap, please refer to your college level report first. If you agree with the college level report, you don't need to submit the data submission template. If you disagree with the college level report, then you can work through the data submission template, but only submit your data submission template if you are meeting the thresholds outlined within the certification form.
Thanks everyone for being here and for being inquisitive.
Yes, thank you so much.